My wife maxed our credit cards on her affair, and I left her bankrupt ass in the dust. Sounds like a country song, right? Except my guitar's been gathering dust since college, and my accent is pure suburban frustration, not Nashville heartbreak. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The warning signs were practically blinking neon, but love makes you stupid. Makes you ignore the late nights, the sudden girls' trips, the password changes on her phone. Classic affair playbook, but I was too busy being the reliable husband, working 60-hour weeks to keep our lifestyle afloat. Our lifestyle. What a joke that turned out to be. The first hint something was seriously wrong came when my card got declined at the gas station. Nothing quite like standing there, holding the pump, watching transaction failed, flash on the screen while the guy behind you sighs dramatically. I thought it was a mistake. Called the bank right there in my car, sitting in the parking lot with the AC failing in the August heat. That's when everything started unraveling. I'm sorry, Mr. Jackson, but your card is over the limit. Over the limit? That was impossible. I managed our finances like a spreadsheet Nazi. Every dollar had its place. Every expense was tracked. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable, and I always kept a $5,000 cushion on the shared credit card. There must be some mistake, I remember saying, feeling that first drop of cold sweat roll down my back. Can you tell me the recent transactions? The list that followed turned my stomach. Hotel charges, expensive restaurants I'd never heard of, a jewelry store, and the kicker, first-class plane tickets to Cancun, all in the last 3 weeks, all while I was pulling overtime on the Henderson project. I sat there, engine off, phone pressed against my ear so hard it hurt, as the customer service rep continued reading charges that represented thousands of dollars I didn't spend. The drive home was a blur. Everything looked different somehow. Sharper, brighter, like someone had adjusted the contrast on the world. My hands wouldn't stop shaking on the steering wheel. You know that feeling when your brain is trying to solve a puzzle, but you already know the answer and it's the worst possible one? That's where I lived for those 20 minutes. I parked in the driveway of our suburban dream home. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a mortgage that would take 30 years to pay off, and just sat there. Through the living room window, I could see Rebecca moving around, probably getting ready for her book club night. Funny how her book club met 3 times a week lately. The garage door remote felt heavy in my hand. One click and I'd have to confront whatever this was. One click and nothing would ever be the same again. I clicked it. Rebecca jumped when I walked in. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Black, low cut, definitely not book club attire unless they were discussing 50 Shades or something. You're home early, she said, and I watched her eyes dart to the clock, to her purse, to the door, calculating. What followed was the most surreal conversation of my life. I didn't shout, didn't throw things, just stood in our kitchen, still wearing my work clothes, clutching my phone with the banking app open, and asked her about the charges. First came denial, classic move. There must be a mistake with the bank. Then deflection. Why are you checking up on me? Don't you trust me? And finally, when I showed her the banking app with all the transactions, the defensive anger. You're always working. What did you expect me to do? Just sit here and wait for you to have time for me? As if maxing out our credit cards on an affair was a reasonable response to feeling neglected. As if financial infidelity on top of actual infidelity was somehow justified. I remember asking very calmly who he was. She didn't want to tell me at first. Then it spilled out. His name was Carlos. They met at her gym. He was a personal trainer. Of course he was a fucking personal trainer. With abs and tattoos and all that shit. The walking cliche of it all almost hurt worse than the betrayal. He makes me feel alive, she said, and I swear I could physically feel something break inside me. I asked about Cancun. Turned out they'd been planning a week-long getaway. First-class tickets. Ocean Front Suite. All on our joint credit card, which was now maxed out at $25,000. $25,000 of my money to fund her tropical fuck fest with Carlos the ab model. You know what's interesting about complete betrayal? The physical symptoms. My chest felt like someone was sitting on it. My ears were ringing. Colors seemed too bright. Time slowed down. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking, the refrigerator humming, Rebecca's nervous breathing. I was going to tell you after I got back, she said, like that was supposed to make it better. I walked out of the kitchen without saying a word. Went upstairs to our bedroom, the bed we'd shared for 6 years, and sat on the edge of it, staring at nothing. I could hear her following me, her heels clicking on the hardwood stairs, her voice rising with that panicky edge when she realized I wasn't yelling, wasn't fighting, wasn't doing anything. "Say something," she demanded, standing in the doorway. "Scream at me or something." But I didn't have anything to say. What was there to say? That she'd broken something that couldn't be fixed? That I'd given her everything I had and it wasn't enough? That I was such a chump I hadn't even noticed my own wife was cheating until the credit card company basically told me? Instead, I asked to see her phone. She hesitated. Of course she did. "This is an invasion of privacy," she said, clutching her purse tighter. The laugh that came out of me didn't sound like my voice. "Privacy? You spent $25,000 of our money on your affair. I think we're well past privacy concerns." When she still wouldn't hand it over, I knew there was worse to discover. And that's when I finally felt the anger coming, rising up from somewhere deep, replacing the shock with something hot and clarifying. I stood up and she actually took a step back. I'd never laid a hand on her, never would, but something in my face must have changed. "How long?" I asked. "What? How long has this been going on?" She looked at the floor, at the walls, anywhere but at me. 3 months. 3 months. 90 days of lies. 90 days of coming home to kiss me with the same lips that had been on him. 90 days of working late, and book clubs, and girls' nights, while I worked overtime to support us. But it wasn't just the cheating. People cheat. It's awful, but it happens. It was the financial betrayal on top of it that broke something fundamental in me. Using our joint cards meant she'd planned for me to pay for her affair. For their hotels, their dinners, their little gifts to each other. And the Cancun trip, that was meant to be paid with money I'd earned while she was gone fucking someone else. The calculated nature of it made me physically ill. I walked to the closet and pulled out my suitcase. Started throwing clothes in, not bothering to fold anything. Rebecca went from defensive to panicked in about 3 seconds flat. "What are you doing? You can't just leave. We need to talk about this." I didn't respond. Just kept packing. "Well, where are you going to go?" she demanded, following me around the room. "This is your house, too. You're just going to run away? That's so immature." The gaslighting was almost impressive. Cheat on your husband, spend his money doing it, then call him immature for not wanting to stick around for more. I finally looked at her, really looked at her, and didn't recognize the person standing there. This stranger in my bedroom wearing my wife's face. Had she always been this person? Or had something changed her? Did it even matter? "I'm going to stay with Jake for a while," I said, naming my oldest friend. "For how long?" "I don't know." The truth was, I already knew I wasn't coming back. Not to live anyway. This house, our marriage, the future we'd planned, it was all contaminated now. But I wasn't ready to say that out loud. Wasn't ready to make it real. I zipped up the suitcase and headed for the door. Rebecca followed me downstairs, her panic escalating with each step. "You can't just leave." "What about our bills?" "The mortgage?" "You know I can't afford this place on my salary." And there it was. Her first thought wasn't about losing me. It was about losing my paycheck. I stopped at the front door and turned to her. "You should have thought about that before you spent $25,000 on your boyfriend." The drive to Jake's place was strange. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides and left just enough of me to operate a vehicle. The radio played, but I couldn't tell you what songs came on. The streets were familiar, but somehow foreign, like I was seeing them from a different angle. Jake took one look at me standing on his doorstep with a suitcase and knew something was seriously wrong. He didn't ask questions, just stepped aside and said, "Spare room's yours as long as you need it." That night, lying in his guest bed staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, I couldn't sleep. My phone kept lighting up with texts and calls from Rebecca, alternating between apologies, justifications, and threats. I turned it off around midnight. The next day was Saturday. I went through the motions of existence, showered, borrowed a razor from Jake, ate something without tasting it. By afternoon, I turned my phone back on and started making calls. First to my bank, where I opened a new account in my name only. Then to a lawyer Jake recommended. Just a consultation. I told myself, just to know where I stand. But deep down, I already knew. This marriage was over. 6 years gone. Our future erased. All because Rebecca couldn't keep her legs closed or her credit cards in her wallet. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Melissa, laid out my options with clinical precision. Nebraska is a no-fault state, so the cheating itself wouldn't impact the divorce settlement. But the financial aspect, that was different. $25,000 of marital funds spent on an extramarital affair Could be classified as dissipation of assets, she explained. Basically, she wasted marital funds on something that didn't benefit the marriage. I almost laughed at the understatement. Yeah, Rebecca's sexual tourism with Carlos definitely hadn't benefited the marriage. So what does that mean, practically speaking? I asked. It means you could be entitled to have those funds counted against her portion of the marital assets in the divorce settlement. For the first time since my card was declined at that gas station, I felt something like hope. Not that I'd get the money back. That was gone. But that there might be some justice. Some consequence for what she'd done. I'll need bank statements, credit card statements, any evidence of the affair. Melissa continued. Texts, emails, witnesses if you have them. I didn't have much yet, but I would. Rebecca wasn't exactly being subtle. Everyone in our social circle probably knew by now. The thought made my face burn with humiliation. How many of our friends had seen them together? How many had kept her secret? Over the next few days, I went through the motions of dismantling my married life. Contacted HR to remove Rebecca from my health insurance. Called the credit card companies to freeze the joint accounts. Visited the bank to ensure my paychecks would go to my new personal account. Rebecca's calls became increasingly frantic as she discovered each of these changes. From my guest room at Jake's, I listened to her voicemails evolve from apologetic to angry to desperate. The mortgage is due next week. Her last message said, a tremor in her voice. And I don't have enough in my account. Please call me back. Please. I didn't call her back. Instead, I paid my half of the mortgage directly to the bank. I wasn't going to let the house go into foreclosure. My name was still on it too. But I wasn't going to hand her money either. A week into my self-imposed exile, Jake came home with information that changed everything. You know my sister works at that fancy gym on Oakwood, right? He said, cracking open a beer and handing me one. The one where Rebecca works out. I nodded, taking the beer but not really wanting it. I hadn't had much appetite for anything lately. Well, turns out this Carlos guy, he's got a bit of a reputation. Your wife isn't the first married woman he's been with. Not even the first this year. Something cold slithered down my spine. What do you mean? Jake looked uncomfortable. Tina says he targets them. Wealthy or comfortable married women. Ones with access to money. He wines and dines them, makes them feel special, gets them to spend on him. Then when the money dries up or the husband finds out, he moves on to the next one. I sat there, beer forgotten in my hand, as Jake's words sank in. Carlos wasn't in love with Rebecca. She was a mark. A target. Just another in a line of bored, middle-class wives he'd seduced for financial gain. Which meant Rebecca had blown up our marriage, maxed out our credit cards, and planned a luxury vacation with a man who was essentially scamming her. The realization should have made me feel better. Validated somehow. Instead, it just added another layer of sick disbelief to the whole mess. How could she have been so stupid? How could I have been married to someone so easily manipulated? And yet, something was shifting inside me. The hollow feeling was receding, replaced by something harder, more focused. Because this wasn't just about Rebecca anymore. It was about this predator who deliberately targeted marriages for profit. I thought about all those charges, the hotels, the restaurants, the jewelry, the first-class tickets to Cancun. Carlos had benefited from all of it, funded by my long hours and careful financial planning. That night, I didn't sleep again, but for a different reason. My mind was racing, piecing together bits of information, forming the outline of something that felt like purpose. Rebecca had made her choices. She would face the consequences of those choices. But Carlos? He'd done this before. Would do it again. Unless someone stopped him. By morning, I knew there would be no reconciliation, no couples counseling, no second chances. But I also knew I wasn't going to just walk away with my half of our assets and start over. No, this required something more. Creative. If Rebecca and Carlos wanted to enjoy the fruits of my labor, they'd learn exactly what kind of man they'd stolen from. Because here's something they didn't know about me. Before I was the reliable husband with the steady job and the mortgage and the 401k, I was the kid who got suspended in 10th grade for hacking into the school's grading system. The teenager who could social engineer his way past any gatekeeper. The college student who paid tuition by exploiting loopholes in online poker sites. I'd left that life behind when I met Rebecca. Grown up, become responsible. But now I was free to be that person again. The one who knew systems could be manipulated if you understood how they worked. And I understood money. I understood credit. I understood the financial system and all its vulnerabilities. I picked up my phone and called Melissa, the lawyer, back. I need to know exactly how much evidence you need to prove dissipation of assets, I said when she answered. And I need to know precisely what I can and cannot legally do with joint accounts before the divorce is filed. She was silent for a moment. Mr. Jackson, what exactly are you planning? I looked out Jake's guest room window at the morning sun. For the first time in days, I felt something like a smile forming. I'm planning to give my wife and her boyfriend exactly what they deserve. The lawyer's voice had that professional caution I'd come to recognize. The tone that said, I need to cover my ass legally while still helping you do what you want. Mr. Jackson, I can advise you on what's legal, but I can't help you plan anything. Vindictive. Of course not, I assured her. I just want to protect myself and get what I'm legally entitled to. Nothing more. She didn't sound convinced, but she walked me through the legalities anyway. I took detailed notes, asking questions that probably raised red flags, but I needed to know exactly where the boundaries were. By the time we hung up, I had a clear picture of what I could legally do, what I might get away with in the gray areas, and what would definitely cross lines I wasn't willing to cross. I'm not a criminal after all. Just a man who'd been wronged and wanted justice. Justice with a side of karma. First order of business, reconnaissance. Sun Tzu said to know your enemy. And while I didn't consider Rebecca my enemy exactly, that space was reserved for Carlos. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I created a new email account and reached out to our circle of friends one by one. Casual messages. Hey, going through some stuff with Rebecca, just wondering if you've noticed anything off lately? The responses were illuminating. Most people were hesitant, not wanting to get involved. But a few were more forthcoming, especially once I made it clear I already knew about the affair. Turns out Rebecca and Carlos hadn't been particularly discreet. They'd been spotted at restaurants across town, at hotel bars, even shopping together at the mall. Sarah, Rebecca's supposed best friend, was the most revealing. After some initial reluctance, she admitted Rebecca had been talking about Carlos for months. She said he made her feel young again. Sarah wrote, said you were too focused on saving for the future to enjoy the present. I told her she should talk to you, not cheat, but she said you wouldn't understand her need for excitement. Excitement. Right. Because mortgage payments and credit card bills aren't exciting enough. The real breakthrough came from Jake's sister Tina. She didn't just know about Carlos, she had dirt on him. Real dirt. He got fired from his last gym for inappropriate relationships with clients. She told me over coffee. But it was worse than that. He was borrowing money from them, getting them to buy him things. One woman even leased him a car. And the gym fired him for this. I asked. Tina nodded. Only after the woman's husband threatened to sue, Carlos moved to our gym about a year ago. Management doesn't know about his history. Any idea how many women he's done this to? She hesitated. At our gym, at least 3 that I know of. All married, all with money. One got divorced over it. I digested this information, feeling that cold anger solidifying into resolve. Has he ever been violent? When confronted, I mean. Not that I've heard. He's more of a runner. When things get messy, he disappears, finds a new hunting ground. Perfect. Next, I needed to understand the financial picture completely. I spent the weekend going through every account, every statement, creating spreadsheets that track normal spending patterns versus the explosion of charges that coincided with the affair. The total damage was worse than I'd initially thought. Beyond the maxed-out credit cards, Rebecca had also drained our joint savings account. Nearly $12,000 that had been earmarked for home repairs and emergencies. All told, she'd blown through almost $40,000 in 3 months. $40,000 on hotels, restaurants, clothing, jewelry, and those first-class tickets to Cancun. The real kicker? The reservation for Cancun was in her name only. Carlos hadn't even put his own name on the booking, probably to avoid any paper trail connecting him directly to the expenses. Smart, but not smart enough. Because Carlos had made one crucial mistake. He'd used our credit card, well, Rebecca had used it for him, to book training sessions at his gym, which meant the gym had his employment information, his tax forms, his address, his bank details for direct deposit. All information that would be very, very useful. While I was building my dossier on Carlos, Rebecca's financial situation was deteriorating rapidly. Without access to my income or our joint credit cards, she was finally facing reality. The mortgage payment I'd sent directly to the bank had bought her some time, but property taxes were coming due, and the utilities and her car payment. Her calls became increasingly desperate. I let most go to voicemail, but answered occasionally, partly to assess her state of mind, partly because some small, weak part of me still responded to the distress in her voice. I can't do this alone, she said during one call, her voice breaking. I need help with the bills. What about Carlos? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Can he help? There was a telling pause. He's going through some financial issues right now. I bet he was. His meal ticket had just been cut off. That's unfortunate, I said, the understatement of the year. But I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're resourceful. Daniel, please. I made a mistake. A horrible mistake. I know that. But we built a life together. 6 years. Doesn't that mean anything? It meant everything. That was the problem. 6 years I could never get back. 6 years of trust I'd never feel again. It means you should have thought about that before you maxed out our credit cards on your boyfriend? I replied, echoing what I'd said the night I left. He's not. She stopped herself. Another telling pause. It's over with Carlos. I ended it. I want to work on us. On our marriage. Too little, too late. But I kept that thought to myself. Better to let her think reconciliation was possible. It would make what came next easier. I need time to think, I said instead. And I need to see some evidence that you're serious. Anything, she said quickly. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want. Start by writing down every expense related to the affair. Every hotel, every dinner, every gift. I need to know exactly what I've been paying for. She hesitated. Why? What good will that do except make us both feel worse? Because I need to know the full extent of the betrayal before I can decide if forgiveness is possible. I said, surprised at how easily the lie came. Can you do that for me? Yes. Yes, of course. I'll start right away. After we hung up, I sat in Jake's living room, staring at nothing. The conversation had left me feeling hollow again, but in a different way. There was no satisfaction in hearing her desperation, only a strange emptiness where my love for her used to be. Jake found me like that, still staring at the wall an hour later. You okay, man? He asked, settling into the chair across from me. I don't know, I admitted. I don't feel anything when I talk to her anymore. Not anger, not love, just nothing. That's probably healthier than the alternative. Maybe, but it feels wrong. 6 years together and now she's just a stranger. A problem to solve. Jake studied me for a moment. You know you don't have to do this, right? Whatever you're planning, you could just divorce her, split the assets, and move on with your life. I'd thought about that. The simple, clean approach. But every time I started to consider it, I remembered those credit card statements. The first-class tickets to Cancun. Carlos systematically targeting married women for their money. It's not just about Rebecca anymore, I said finally. It's about him, about what he does. He's done this before, Jake. He'll do it again if someone doesn't stop him. And that someone has to be you. Who else is going to do it? Jake didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I really. But I knew I couldn't walk away. Not without some kind of justice. The next day I made 2 significant moves. First, I filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Melissa handled the paperwork, warning me again to keep everything above board. The dissipation of assets argument is strong, she assured me. We have clear evidence she spent marital funds on the affair. There's no need to do anything that could backfire. I nodded, agreeing verbally while mentally reviewing my plans. Nothing illegal. Just creative. The second move was more personal. I called my old college roommate Trevor. We hadn't spoken much in recent years. Life gets busy, people drift apart. But there was a time when we'd been thick as thieves. Literally in some cases. Trevor had gone legitimate too, parlaying his hacking skills into a lucrative cybersecurity career. But he still knew people. People with specialized skills. Dan the man, he said when he picked up, like no time had passed. What's the emergency? How do you know it's an emergency? Because it's been, what, 2 years? 3? You don't call me to chat about the weather. Fair point. I gave him the abbreviated version. Cheating wife, financial betrayal. Carlos, the predatory personal trainer. Shit, man. That's brutal. What do you need? Alibi for when you kill him. I laughed despite myself. Nothing that dramatic. I need information. Specifically, I need to know if Carlos has any skeletons in his closet. Criminal record, financial issues, anything I can use. Use for what? Let's just say I want to make sure he remembers me. Trevor was quiet for a moment. This doesn't sound like the Daniel Jackson I know. The straight arrow who freaked out when we skimmed that online poker site. Yeah, well, the straight arrow got taken for 40 grand by his cheating wife. He's rethinking his approach to life. Another pause. I'll see what I can find. Might take a couple days. And Dan? Be careful. Revenge feels good in the moment, but it can leave a mess. Rich coming from the guy who once sent a virus to his ex's computer that replaced all her term papers with porn scripts. But I appreciated the concern. I'm always careful, I assured him. That's why I'm calling you instead of going in blind. While waiting for Trevor's intel, I continued my own investigations. Rebecca sent me the list I'd requested. Every expense related to the affair, neatly itemized in a spreadsheet that was both thorough and nauseating in its detail. $320 for dinner at Marcello's. $450 for a night at the Grand Hotel. $780 at a men's clothing store for gifts for Carlos. The entries went on, each one a fresh reminder of her betrayal. But the list wasn't just painful, it was useful. It confirmed my own accounting and filled in some gaps. More importantly, it gave me a clear picture of their patterns. Where they went, what they liked, how they operated. I also kept tabs on Rebecca through our dwindling social circle. The divorce filing had forced her to tell people what was happening, though I heard she was spinning a narrative of her as the neglected wife, me as the workaholic husband who didn't appreciate her. Some believed her, others didn't. I found I didn't particularly care either way. What I did care about was news that Carlos had suddenly become scarce. According to Tina, he'd called in sick to the gym several days in a row. His social media accounts had gone quiet. I think he's getting ready to bail, she told me. That's his pattern. When things get complicated, he disappears. I couldn't let that happen. Not before I was ready. Trevor's information arrived 4 days after our call. Not by phone, too insecure, but in person, on a USB drive delivered to Jake's door. Your guy's been busy, Trevor said, settling onto Jake's couch with a beer. 3 different gyms in 3 different cities over the last 5 years. Similar pattern at each one. Befriends wealthy female clients, seduces them, lives off their money until it blows up, then moves on. Criminal record? I asked, plugging the USB into my laptop. Nothing major. DUI 7 years ago. Small possession charge that got dropped. But here's where it gets interesting. He's got gambling debts. Significant ones. Now we were talking. How significant? According to my source, he owes about 30 grand to some very unpleasant people in Vegas. Been dodging their collection calls for months. I felt a slow smile spread across my face. That explains the urgency of his scams. And the cash withdrawals Rebecca was making. Trevor nodded. Probably. The guy's desperate, which makes him dangerous in some ways but vulnerable in others. Vulnerable is good, I murmured, scrolling through the files Trevor had brought. Credit reports, bank statements, employment history. I didn't ask how he'd obtained them. Better not to know. But one document made me pause. He's married. Trevor leaned over to look at the screen. Was. Divorced 3 years ago. Left his ex with a mountain of debt from what I can tell. Another victim. Another life Carlos had upended for his own gain. His ex might be willing to talk, Trevor suggested. Share some dirt. I shook my head. No need to drag her back into his mess. I've got enough here. After Trevor left, I stayed up late, reviewing everything he'd brought, incorporating it into my own files. By morning, I had a complete picture and a plan. Carlos was in debt to dangerous people. He'd been using Rebecca to help pay that debt. Now that source of funds was cut off, he was preparing to run again. Start fresh in a new city with a new hunting ground. Unless I stopped him, the plan came together with surprising ease. Maybe because I'd been subconsciously working on it since that first night at Jake's. Maybe because part of me had always been capable of this kind of calculated thinking. Either way, by the time the sun rose, I knew exactly what I was going to do. How I would use Carlos's vulnerabilities against him. How I would ensure Rebecca faced the consequences of her choices. How I would get justice without breaking any laws or compromising my own integrity. It would require timing, precision, a bit of social engineering, and a willingness to push boundaries I'd previously respected. But most of all, it would require Carlos and Rebecca to be exactly who I knew them to be. Selfish, short-sighted, and greedy. I picked up my phone and called Rebecca. We need to talk, I said when she answered, her voice thick with sleep. In person. About reconciliation. Really? The hope in her voice would have been touching if I didn't know better. When? Tonight. Dinner at Marcello's. 8 p.m. Her favorite restaurant. The scene of several expensive dates with Carlos, according to her expense list. I'll be there, she said quickly. Thank you, Daniel. You won't regret this. 1 down, 1 to go. Next, I created a new email account under a generic name and sent a message to Carlos at the gym. Mr. Alvarez, I represent certain parties in Las Vegas who have been attempting to contact you regarding an outstanding debt. My clients are growing impatient. However, they are willing to offer a one-time settlement opportunity that would resolve this matter completely. If you're interested in discussing terms, meet me at the bar at Marcello's restaurant tonight at 8:15 p.m. Come alone, be discreet, and be prepared to make arrangements for immediate partial payment. This offer expires at midnight. William Grayson, resolution specialist. I read it over, imagining Carlos's reaction. The fear, the hope for an easy out, the desperation that would drive him to the meeting despite his suspicions. With both messages sent, I spent the rest of the day preparing, gathering documents, making calls, setting up dominoes that would fall at precisely the right moment. By late afternoon, everything was in place. I showered, shaved, and put on my best suit. The one Rebecca had always said made me look like a younger, more dangerous version of myself. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back. His eyes were harder, his jaw more set. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a trusting husband living in blissful ignorance. Now I was something else. You sure about this? Jake asked as I headed for the door. I wasn't sure about anything anymore, except that I needed to see this through. I'll text you if I need backup. I promised. Just don't do anything stupid, he called after me. Nothing worth going to jail for. I paused with my hand on the doorknob, looking back at my oldest friend. Don't worry, I'm not going to jail. I was, however, going to make sure Carlos and Rebecca got exactly what they deserved. Driving to Marcello's, I felt strangely calm. The hollowness was gone, replaced by a focused intensity I hadn't experienced since those college days, hacking into systems just to prove I could. There was a certain clarity in having a mission, in knowing exactly what steps to take next. I parked a block away from the restaurant, giving myself a clear view of the entrance. At 7:50, Rebecca arrived, wearing a black dress similar to the one from the night I discovered the affair. She looked nervous, checking her phone, smoothing her hair as she went inside. At 8:10, right on schedule, Carlos appeared. Even from a distance, I could see why women found him attractive. Tall, muscular, with that confident walk that said he was used to getting what he wanted. Not tonight, though. Tonight, Carlos Alvarez was going to learn there are consequences to targeting the wrong man's wife. I waited until he entered the restaurant, then took a deep breath and reached for my own phone. Time to set the final pieces in motion. I sent a quick text to Melissa, my lawyer. The message was simple, proceeding as discussed. Documents ready? Her reply came seconds later. Everything filed. Proceed with caution. With that final confirmation, I walked into Marcello's, the restaurant where my wife had wined and dined her lover on my dime. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now using it as the stage for my own performance. The hostess recognized me. Rebecca and I had been regulars before the affair, and her eyes widened slightly. Word had obviously gotten around. Table for one? She asked, professional mask firmly in place. Actually, I'm meeting my wife, I said, scanning the dining room. But I need a favor first. Could you direct me to where she's sitting without letting her see me? I want to observe something before I join her. The hostess hesitated, then nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. She led me through a service corridor that offered a view of the main dining area without being immediately visible. She's at table 12, she said quietly. Corner booth. I thanked her with a generous tip and positioned myself where I could see without being seen. Rebecca was indeed at our usual table, checking her watch nervously, sipping what looked like a martini. She'd already ordered a second drink, judging by the empty glass. Dutch courage. She was going to need it. While I watched, Carlos entered the restaurant. He headed straight for the bar, his eyes scanning the room anxiously. Looking for his resolution specialist? No doubt. He ordered a drink and kept checking his phone, completely unaware that Rebecca was sitting less than 30 feet away. Perfect. They hadn't coordinated, hadn't realized they were both being played. I waited 5 more minutes, letting tension build for both of them, then texted Rebecca. Running 10 minutes late. Order me the usual. Her relief was visible as she read the message. She flagged down a waiter and spoke to him, presumably ordering my favorite dish, playing the dutiful wife. As if a pasta order could erase $40,000 of betrayal. Next, I texted Jake, in position. Targets acquired. Green light. Jake's response was immediate. On my way. ETA 3 minutes. With both Rebecca and Carlos distracted, her with menu planning, him with anxious bar scanning, I moved to the final preparation stage. I walked to the men's room, where I checked my appearance one last time and reviewed the documents on my phone. Everything was in order. By the time I emerged, Jake had arrived and taken his position at a table with a clear view of both the bar and Rebecca's booth. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave me a subtle nod. Back up in place. I took a deep breath and walked straight to Rebecca's table. Her face lit up when she saw me. A complex mixture of hope, anxiety, and what looked like genuine happiness. For a fraction of a second, I felt a twinge of something. Not quite regret, not quite sadness. Just acknowledgement of what we'd once been to each other. "Daniel," she said, starting to rise. "You look great." I gestured for her to stay seated and slid into the booth across from her. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Of course," she replied, reaching for my hand across the table. I let her take it, feeling nothing as her fingers closed around mine. "I've missed you so much. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did and—" "Let's order first," I interrupted gently. "Talk better on a full stomach." Relief crossed her face again. She thought I was going easy on her, creating a pleasant environment for reconciliation discussions. I glanced toward the bar. Carlos was still there, nursing his drink, checking his watch. Growing increasingly agitated as his 8:15 appointment failed to materialize. The waiter arrived with my scotch, the usual that Rebecca had ordered for me, and took our dinner selections. I sipped the drink, letting the smooth burn center me, prepare me for what came next. "So," I said once the waiter had gone, "you've had time to think." Rebecca nodded eagerly. "I have, and I know what I did was unforgivable. But I also know what we have, is worth fighting for." "Tell me about Carlos," I said so casually I might have been asking about the weather. She flinched visibly. "It's over. Completely over. I haven't spoken to him since you found out." Lie number one. According to Tina, they'd been spotted together just last week arguing outside the gym. "Really?" I said, taking another sip of scotch. "That's interesting, because I heard he's been helping you figure out how to pay the bills since I cut off access to our accounts." Her face flushed. "Who told you that?" "It's not, yes, he offered, but I didn't accept. I wouldn't do that." Lie number two. Carlos had paid her car payment last week, a fact I knew because I'd been monitoring both their bank accounts. Trevor's skills were impressive. "Rebecca," I said softly, leaning forward, "do you know why I asked you to meet me here tonight?" Hope flickered in her eyes. "To talk about us? About possibly working things out?" I shook my head slowly. "No, I asked you here so I could look you in the eye when I tell you that our marriage is over. Completely and irreversibly over." The color drained from her face. "But you said reconciliation." I said we needed to talk about reconciliation. And we do. Just not the kind you're hoping for. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the table to her. "What's this?" she asked, not touching it. "Divorce papers. Already filed. This is your copy." Her hands trembled as she finally reached for the envelope. "You filed already? Without telling me?" "Yes. On grounds of irreconcilable differences, with a claim for dissipation of marital assets. $40,112 to be exact. The amount you spent on your affair—" "Daniel, please," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Can't we at least try? Go to counseling or something?" I looked at her, really looked at her, searching for any remnant of the woman I'd loved for 6 years. The woman I'd planned a future with, built a home with. But all I saw was someone who had calculated that her boyfriend was a less reliable meal ticket than her husband, and was now desperately trying to restore her financial security. "No," I said simply. "We can't. But that's not actually why I asked you here tonight." Something in my tone made her sit up straighter, wariness replacing the tears. "Then why?" I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "I wanted to introduce you to someone, or rather reintroduce you." With perfect timing, I saw Carlos check his watch one final time, drain his drink, and stand up from the bar stool. He'd given up on his mysterious Vegas contact and was preparing to leave. I raised my hand and waved him over. The moment Carlos saw me, he froze. Then his eyes tracked to Rebecca, widening in recognition and shock. He visibly considered bolting for the door, but something, curiosity maybe, or the desperate hope that his debt solution was somehow connected to this scenario, made him approach our table instead. "Mr. Alvarez," I said pleasantly, "please join us. We were just discussing some financial matters I believe you'll find relevant." Rebecca was staring at Carlos in horror. "What is he doing here? Carlos, what are you doing here?" Carlos looked between us, confusion clear on his handsome face. "I was meeting someone, business matter. Nothing to do with this." "Oh, but it has everything to do with this." I corrected, gesturing to the empty chair at our table. Sit. Unless you'd prefer I call my associates in Las Vegas? I understand they're most eager to speak with you about your gambling debts. The blood drained from his face so quickly I thought he might pass out. With wooden movements, he sat down, maintaining as much distance from Rebecca as the table allowed. You, he said, you sent that email about the debt resolution? I nodded, taking another sip of my scotch. I did, though I should clarify, I have no actual connection to your creditors in Vegas. Yet, that could change depending on how this conversation goes. Rebecca was looking back and forth between us, comprehension dawning slowly. What gambling debts? Carlos, what is he talking about? Carlos ignored her, focusing entirely on me. What do you want? First information, I said. Rebecca here seems to believe your relationship was about passion, excitement, making her feel young again. I'm curious, was that true? Or was it about access to her credit cards? To our joint accounts? To $40,000 of my money? His jaw worked, eyes darting between me and Rebecca. For a moment, I thought he might actually double down on the love story. But self-preservation won out. Look, man, it wasn't personal, he said. I didn't know you. I just needed the money. I'm in deep with some guys in Vegas, and they're not the patient type. Rebecca made a small, wounded sound, like something inside her had broken. Welcome to the club. So all those things you said, she started. He said them before. I cut in. To at least 7 other married women in 3 different cities over the past 5 years. It's his business model. Seduce, extract resources, move on. You weren't special, Rebecca. You were a mark. She turned to Carlos, her expression hardening from hurt to fury. Is that true? Was any of it real? He had the decency to look uncomfortable. Some of it, I mean, you're attractive. We had fun, but ultimately it was about the money. I finished for him. The hotels, the dinners, the gifts, the cash withdrawals, all of it funneling toward paying off your gambling debts. How much of that $40,000 actually made it to your creditors, Carlos? Half. Less. His silence was answer enough. Rebecca's fury was now directed at me. You knew? You set this up to humiliate me? To what, teach me a lesson? No, I said calmly. I set this up to offer both of you a choice. I pulled 2 more envelopes from my jacket and placed them on the table. One labeled with Rebecca's name, one with Carlos's. What? What is this? Carlos asked suspiciously. Options, I replied. Let me explain the situation as it currently stands. Rebecca, you've spent $40,000 of our marital funds on your affair. Under Nebraska law, that's classified as dissipation of assets, and you'll be required to reimburse me from your portion of our marital property division. Given our assets and debts, that effectively means you'll walk away from this marriage with nothing except your personal belongings and your car. Possibly not even the car, depending on how the judge rules. She blanched. That can't be right. I get half of everything. That's the law. Half of everything minus what you wasted on the affair, I corrected. My lawyer has already filed the necessary motions. The evidence is overwhelming, especially since you helpfully provided that itemized list of affair-related expenses. I turned to Carlos. As for you, Mr. Alvarez, you've participated knowingly in the dissipation of marital assets. While I can't sue you directly for that, I can certainly share information about your activities with your employer, your landlord, and, most concerning for you, I imagine, your creditors in Las Vegas. I understand they employ rather direct methods of debt collection. Carlos's face had gone from pale to ashen. You wouldn't. I absolutely would. In fact, I've already prepared those communications. They go out automatically at midnight unless I stop them. The restaurant continued its normal dinner service around us. Other patrons completely unaware of the drama unfolding at our table. A waiter approached with our appetizers, took one look at the tension radiating from our booth, and wisely retreated. What's in the envelopes? Rebecca finally asked. Agreements, I said. Options that might be slightly less catastrophic for both of you. I pushed Carlos's envelope toward him. Yours is simple, a promissory note. You agree to repay the full amount you extracted from our marital funds, $40,000, over the next 5 years. Reasonable monthly payments, documented with proper legal paperwork. In exchange, I don't contact your creditors, your employer, or anyone else about your predatory behavior. He opened the envelope with shaking hands, scanning the document inside. I don't have this kind of money. You had it when Rebecca was providing it. I pointed out. Figure it out. Get another job. Sell your possessions. Consider it the cost of targeting the wrong man's wife. And if I refuse? I shrugged. Then at midnight, your creditors receive a very detailed report of your current whereabouts, employment, bank accounts, and assets. I imagine they'll be at your doorstep by morning. Fear flashed across his face. Real fear. I'll need time to review this with a lawyer. You have until 11:59 p.m., I said pleasantly. The signed document can be emailed to the address on the last page. Rebecca was already opening her envelope, her movements stiff with anger. And what's my option? Similar concept, different details. I explained. You agree to a divorce settlement that splits all marital assets equally, ignoring the dissipation claim. You keep your car, your personal items, and approximately half of our joint holdings. About $120,000 all told. In exchange, you take full responsibility for the credit card debt you accumulated during the affair. Her eyes widened. That's almost $30,000. $28,642 to be precise, I corrected. The remainder of the $40,000 came from our savings accounts, which is already gone. This way, you walk away with something instead of nothing. She looked down at the agreement, then back at me. And if I refuse? Try to fight this in court. Then we proceed with the divorce as filed. I pursue the full dissipation claim. You end up with nothing except debts and legal fees. I leaned forward. Rebecca, I have documented evidence of every penny you spent on this affair. I have witnesses who can testify to seeing you with Carlos at hotels and restaurants. I have the itemized list you yourself provided. No judge is going to rule in your favor. The reality of her situation was sinking in. 6 weeks ago, she'd had a comfortable life, a devoted husband, and access to joint finances that allowed her to pursue an affair without financial constraints. Now she was facing either significant debt or complete financial ruin. You planned all this, she said quietly. From the moment you found out. Not all of it, I admitted. Some pieces fell into place as I went along. But yes, I've been working toward this moment since I discovered what you'd done. Carlos, who had been reading his agreement more carefully, looked up. This says I have to leave the state. Find employment elsewhere. I nodded. Non-negotiable. I don't want you anywhere near Nebraska, targeting more married women. Think of it as a fresh start. A chance to rebuild your life somewhere your reputation hasn't preceded you. That's bullshit, he protested. You can't force me to move. I'm not forcing you to do anything, I reminded him. I'm offering you a choice. Repay what you stole and relocate, or deal with your Vegas creditors. Your decision entirely. Rebecca was still staring at her agreement. We could have talked about this. Worked something out without this theater. Like you talked to me before maxing out our credit cards on your affair, I countered. Like you talked to me before planning a first-class vacation with your lover using my money. No, Rebecca. You forfeited the right to a reasonable negotiation when you decided to betray me in the most personal and financial way possible. The weight of consequences was settling on both of them now. Carlos, realizing his pattern of seducing and exploiting married women, had finally caught up with him. Rebecca, understanding that her actions had destroyed not just her marriage, but her financial security. I stood up, placing several bills on the table to cover the drinks and untouched appetizers. You have until midnight to decide. The agreements are straightforward, but feel free to consult attorneys if you wish. Just remember the clock is ticking. Before walking away, I paused, looking at Rebecca one last time. For what it's worth, I did love you. Completely. I would have done anything for you. I glanced at Carlos, then back to her. But not this. I won't be the man who funds his own betrayal. With that, I turned and walked away from the table, past Jake, who gave me a subtle nod, and out into the cool evening air. For the first time in 6 weeks, I felt like I could breathe properly. The weight hadn't disappeared completely, but it had shifted, become manageable. I drove back to Jake's place in silence. No radio, no distractions. Just the sound of my own breathing and the occasional car passing in the opposite direction. I felt not happy exactly, but resolved. Like I'd finally addressed an infected wound that had been poisoning me from within. Jake was waiting when I got back. 2 beers already opened on the coffee table. How'd it go? He asked as I collapsed onto his couch. According to plan, I said, taking one of the beers. The rest is up to them. You think they'll sign? I nodded. They don't have better options. Carlos is terrified of his Vegas creditors, and Rebecca knows she'll get nothing if we go to court. Jake studied me for a moment. And how do you feel? It was a good question. One I'd been avoiding for weeks, focusing instead on the mechanics of my plan, the details of execution. Hollow, I admitted finally. Like I've won a game I never wanted to play. Second thoughts? I considered this, taking a long pull from my beer. No, they made their choices. Now they're facing the consequences. That's how it should be. And what about you? What consequences are you facing? Leave it to Jake to cut straight to the heart of things. He'd always been the philosopher between us. Loss, I said after a moment. Complete loss. Of my marriage, my home, the future I thought I had, the person I thought I was married to. I stared at the ceiling. Maybe even the person I thought I was. How so? The old Daniel would have just walked away, filed for divorce, split everything down the middle, started over. He wouldn't have orchestrated this. Jake considered this. The old Daniel didn't know what betrayal felt like. Didn't understand that sometimes justice needs a helping hand. Maybe he was right. Maybe this new version of myself, harder, more calculating, less willing to turn the other cheek, was who I needed to be now. Or maybe it was just a temporary adaptation, a necessary evolution to navigate this particular crisis. Either way, I didn't hate who I'd become. My phone buzzed at 11:42 p.m. An email from Melissa, my lawyer. Both agreements received, signed, and notarized. Congratulations. Settlement terms accepted. I showed the message to Jake, who raised his beer bottle in a toast. To justice served cold, I clinked my bottle against his. And to new beginnings, because that's what tomorrow would be. The first day of my new life. A life without Rebecca, without the dream home, without the comfortable suburban existence we'd built. But also a life without lies, without betrayal, without $40,000 of debt funding someone else's good time. As midnight approached, I sent a text to the automated system that would have dispatched those damaging communications about Carlos to his creditors, employers, and associates. A simple code that canceled the sequence. I was many things. Hurt, angry, vengeful. But I kept my word. Carlos had signed. He would pay back what he'd taken and leave the state. His predatory days in Nebraska were over. Rebecca had signed too. She would keep half our assets but assume the credit card debt from the affair. A fair outcome, all things considered. More than fair, given what she'd done. As for me, I'd gotten what I wanted. Justice, financial protection, and the knowledge that neither of them had gotten away with their betrayal. But victory felt different than I'd imagined. Less triumphant. More quiet. My phone buzzed again at 11:57 p.m. A text from Rebecca. I know you hate me right now, and you have every right to. But I am sorry. Truly sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for hurting you. For betraying you. You deserved better. I stared at the message for a long time, wondering how to respond. Or whether to respond at all. In the end, I simply wrote, yes, I did. Then I turned off my phone, finished my beer, and prepared to sleep, really sleep, for the first time since discovering her betrayal. Tomorrow would be a new day. The first day of whatever came next. And for the first time in 6 weeks, I found myself looking forward to it. I'd like to say the next few months were tough. But honestly, they were fucking liberating. Jake let me crash at his place until I found an apartment downtown. One of those modern lofts with exposed brick and windows that actually open. It was half the size of the suburban dream home Rebecca and I had shared. But it was mine. All mine. No compromises on furniture. No arguing about wall colors. No pretending to like throw pillows. The divorce was finalized with record speed. Turns out when both parties sign comprehensive settlement agreements ahead of time, the legal system can move surprisingly efficiently. The judge gave me a look when he reviewed our terms, like he wasn't sure what I'd done to get Rebecca to agree to them. But everything was legal, signed by both parties and their respective lawyers. No grounds for objection. Rebecca stuck to her end of the deal, took the credit card debt, got half our assets minus those affair expenses. According to mutual friends, she downsized to a small condo, took a second job, and was slowly digging herself out of the financial hole she'd created. Part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. As for Carlos, he kept his promise too, though I suspect more out of fear than integrity. Monthly payments arrived like clockwork, transferred directly to a special account I'd set up. I had Trevor monitor his whereabouts. He'd relocated to Arizona, found work at an upscale gym in Scottsdale, probably looking for his next wealthy bored wife to exploit. At least it wouldn't be in my backyard. For the first payment, I felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction when the money hit my account. By the third payment, I just felt nothing. The money didn't matter. It never had. It was the principle of the thing, the justice of it. Work improved without the shadow of betrayal hanging over me. I got that promotion I'd been grinding toward. The one Rebecca had complained was taking too much of my time and attention. Ironic, considering where that attention had been going instead. Friends sorted themselves naturally. Those who understood what had happened and supported me stuck around. Those who bought Rebecca's neglectful husband, narrative drifted away. Good riddance to both her and them. 6 months after that night at Marcello's, I was sitting at my desk reviewing quarterly reports when an email notification popped up. Another payment from Carlos, right on schedule. But this time, something felt different. I stared at the notification, at the running total of how much he'd repaid so far, and realized I didn't care anymore. The money, the revenge, the whole orchestrated comeuppance. It had served its purpose. I was done. That evening, I called Trevor. "I need another favor," I said when he picked up. "Let me guess. You want to release the Kraken on Carlos after all?" I laughed. "The opposite, actually. I want to end it." There was a pause on the line. "End it how?" "I'm going to forgive the remaining balance. Let him off the hook." "You're shitting me," Trevor said, genuine surprise in his voice. "After everything you went through to set this up, it's not about him anymore," I explained. "It's about me, about who I want to be moving forward." "And who's that?" I thought about it. Not the guy who checks his bank account every month to watch his ex-wife's affair partner make penance payments. Not the guy who builds his life around settling old scores. So, what? You're just going to let him walk away? He's already paid back almost a quarter of what he took. That's enough. I've made my point. Trevor was quiet for a moment. "You sure about this? Doesn't feel like the ending you planned." "No," I agreed. "It's better." The next day I had Melissa draw up paperwork forgiving the remaining debt obligation. The document included one final condition. Carlos had to remain outside Nebraska for at least 3 more years. Not legally enforceable, probably, but I figured the implied threat would be enough to keep him away. I sent the document with a short message. "We're done. Don't come back." His reply was equally brief. "Thank you. I won't." That same week, I ran into Rebecca at a coffee shop downtown. One of those awkward ex-spouse encounters you're never really prepared for. She looked different, thinner, older somehow, but also more substantial. Like she'd found some backbone in the aftermath of our divorce. "Daniel," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "You look good." "So do you," I replied, meaning it more than I expected to. We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment, both clutching overpriced coffee like shields. "I heard you got that promotion," she finally said. "Congratulations." "Thanks. I heard you're working at the gallery now. Art sales suits you." She nodded. "It does, actually. Better than corporate marketing ever did." Another silence. What do you say to the person who knew you better than anyone, betrayed you completely, and now exists in this strange state of being neither stranger nor friend? "I forgave the rest of Carlos's debt," I said, surprising myself with the admission. Her eyebrows rose. "Why?" I shrugged. "Didn't need it hanging over me anymore. Or him. Or any of us." "That's unexpectedly generous," she said carefully. "Not really. Just practical." "Time to move on." She studied me for a moment. "You have, haven't you? Moved on." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yeah, I have." And standing there, I realized it was true. The anger that had driven me for months, the betrayal that had hollowed me out, the vindictive need to make them pay, it had faded to background noise. Not gone completely, maybe never would be, but no longer the driving force in my life. "Good," she said softly. "You deserve that." On that, at least, we could agree. I don't know if there's a moral to this story. People make choices. Choices have consequences. Sometimes you have to engineer those consequences yourself to make sure justice is served. But at some point, you have to decide what kind of justice you're really after. The kind that punishes others, or the kind that frees you. I chose freedom. Maybe that's the real revenge. Living well, moving forward, refusing to let their betrayal define my future, the way it had defined those months of my life. My wife maxed our credit cards on her affair, and I left her bankrupt. But in the end, it wasn't about the money at all. It was about reclaiming myself from the ruins of what we'd built together. About finding the strength to demand better. From her, from Carlos, and most importantly, from myself. And that, more than any revenge, is what I'll take with me into whatever comes next.